Welcome to Coffee with Democrats, a sensible platform for progressive conversations. Coffee with Democrats is a grassroots movement dedicated to hearing from Democrats, candidates, legislators, and friends from all political backgrounds who want great conversations. Coffee with Democrats is committed to increase Democrat voter registration and Democrat voter turnout by making voting more exciting and meaningful. And now here's your host of Coffee with Democrats, Kevin Dawson.
Good morning. We are on Coffee with Democrats, and we have got the most special guest with us today. And we are so excited to have Jane George with us. She is just an outstanding advocate for the Democrats in the state of Tennessee. So, Jane, good morning. How are you doing this morning?
Good morning. I'm really well, and I'm so happy to be with you today, and so excited to talk about this campaign, and thrilled to see what's happening for Democrats in the blue wave in this cycle.
Absolutely. We are excited to have you on with us and excited to talk with you. And again, for the followers who are listening to Coffee with Democrats, Jane is running for the U.S. Congress for House District 2 in Tennessee. And we want to do everything we can to support her. So we're going to talk about that on how to get to her Act Blue account and how to volunteer and help with her as well. So for those people who are following Coffee with Democrats and are listening to this right now, please share this link right now with all of your friends and all of your followers. Get as many people to come on to this Coffee with Democrats session and listen to this session because it's so important. And we've got such a wonderful, wonderful guest. You can follow us on YouTube Live at Coffee with Democrats 7998. When that pops up, you'll see that the icon will be glowing red or green or something, some color. And you can click on that and follow the live feed that we have. Also on Facebook, it's just Coffee with Democrats on Facebook. And again, whenever that comes on, the icon will be glowing and you can click on that and follow the live link. And then also on Twitter, on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it nowadays, it's just at Coffee with Dems, @ Coffee with Dems, DEMS. Elon Musk shorted us out of the last letters of Democrats, so we had to shorten it up to DEMS. So that is how you can follow us. Again, please share with your friends, your family, your followers. Get as many people to come on Coffee with Democrats and join us today because this is, again, one of the most important conversations that we're going to have in the month of April. And we are so excited to have Jane with us. So again, good morning, Jane. And we need to ask you a little bit. I mean, this is Coffee with Democrats. We got this started by just joining people in the coffee corner of the coffee shop and just having conversations. And that's what we've kind of grown from. So, I mean, we got to talk about coffee at this point. What's your favorite coffee?
I love it. You know, I've had such an interesting relationship with coffee. So I have had periods in my life. I went for 7 years with no coffee.
Oh, yeah.
And when I was in graduate school, which was a crazy time to give a coffee, but there are other ways to get caffeine. And I love espresso. I'm a little bit of a coffee snob, but I remember when I was growing up and we would go out to eat and we would go be in like a diner or somewhere. And I had a little cousin who would say, I just want me some restaurant coffee.
There's
and that
nothing
became a thing in our house.
Yeah, there's nothing better than an old coffee pot in a very good, very nice restaurant. That's something good about that. And just tell you a little bit about my background. I worked for 42 years with the railroad, and I was on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week as a locomotive engineer. And because of that, I grew to really appreciate McCafe coffee. That's kind of my go-to, is just drive through McDonald's, tell them 5 sweeteners, 5 creamers, and then I'm good to go. So I don't like the taste of coffee that much, but I like the effects of it. It helps wake me up first thing in the morning. So thanks again for sharing a little bit on that. Scott, you want to share about your morning routine, about your coffee that you like?
Absolutely. There was a time when I was much more of a coffee snob than what I am now. And instead, I make a full pot of coffee in the evening and then drink iced coffee every morning. This morning was only a 2-quart day, so that's okay. But yeah, I love my iced coffee with a little splash of half and half, and that's how I get my day started.
And Scott is known for drinking coffee out of a mason jar.
Uh,
That
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 fit
is
right in Tennessee.
absolutely, yes, yes. So let me introduce everybody to Jane. Jane, her roots run deep in East Tennessee. She has seen so many changes over the years, and she has sure gone through some growing pains in her life. Her grandparents were in the first graduating class at Carter High School. In fact, as a child, she used to climb the trees and chase the cows on their land where the Strawberry Plains exit is now off of I-40. She learned to water ski barefoot and fish on Norris Lake where her grandparents lived. And again, I have to relate to you on that. I used to slalom ski all the time, and some other time we'll get into our stories about trying to barefoot and water ski. But I am an admirer of yours already because I never could barefoot.
Well, I will say that, I mean, I weighed all of 40 pounds soaking wet. This is when I was a little bitty girl and they pull us off the dock, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. This is not an adult behavior.
So this is something that I found very, very nice about your bio. And I love the way you state this because you talk about your grandfather in such endearing remarks. You say it's your granddaddy was a dyed-in-the-wool Republican and your grandmother was a yellow dog Democrat. Opposites attracted, obviously, back then. You grew up with a family that believed the right to vote was hard-won and an obligation for every American. The political talk at your family's table growing up was full of passion, often fierce disagreement, but no one was ever asked to leave, called names, or told they were un-American. That dialogue taught you the importance of differing viewpoints with your hope to bring that back to Washington and Congress as their representative. And I have to agree with you on that. I love that statement. You did go off to college and you studied science and you earned both a Bachelor of Science and Master of Science in Biology. And where was that college that you went off to?
I went to UCLA.
Oh, Southern California. Awesome. Great degree and a great school. You returned home to Knoxville and started a small business and have always been engaged in the political process. She learned a lot about the ways of Tennessee and has become a place that is driven by corporate powers, not constituents. While big profits for the wealthy company owners increase, the living wage hasn't changed since July of 2009. The price of homes and the cost of living has raised and gone up, but the federal wage set by the federal government for the state of Tennessee has not changed. That's one fight she will take to Washington. Her passion lies in her desire to work to create a safe political space in which the voice of the people is heard and acknowledged and represented at the highest levels of government. She wants to be known as someone who stands up for victims of domestic abuse, not votes to support domestic abusers. Someone who fights the extremes of party politics, not joins them. Somebody who brings strong female voice to the floor of the House of Representatives, not someone who supports the silence and subjugation of women. Someone who will work for and be with the people of East Tennessee, not make a permanent home in Washington, D.C. That is the definition of a citizen representative. Ladies and gentlemen, join us as we acknowledge Jane George. Thank you, Jane, again for being on Coffee with Democrats.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I appreciate you sharing so much of who I am and what I'm about as a representative and what I want to do in Washington. Washington's a tricky thing because people assume that you can go and that you've just been given all this power and that you're able to just go and start slugging it out, to fight to create laws. And it's a very complicated issue, as many people know. One of the good things about me is that I'm not a professional politician. And so as a consequence of that, I don't have all that baggage. I don't have PACs. I don't have investments from corporations behind me that I have to negotiate and navigate through what's already going to be a very challenging space for change. Really, my goal in Washington initially would be to join and work with those folks that are already working on legislation and building legislation that would benefit those of us in my district. So specifically, if there are things that have to do with bringing money in to support farmers, that's going to be a big thing here. My district is a very large part of it is agricultural. So that's something I would work on. Another issue that we have that's prevalent here in our district is access to healthcare. That's a really big deal. We're seeing that shift and change in so many ways, and we need advocacy at the top of the levels of government to help us here in Tennessee to make sure that people have access. And we'll talk about all these things in more detail. For those of you who are going to stick with us, there is more information to come. So just kind of on the surface here, but there are serious issues here, specifically with women's access to reproductive health rights, but those laws and how they affect even women of non-reproductive age, and then how that starts to affect and filter out into the community from an economic perspective. So there's a lot of layers to this. So healthcare is another big one I'd love to jump on and work with people, because the truth is I'm probably going to get assigned to, the committee that decides the color of the postage stamp, not even the image, that's how you get started, right? So it's going to be a matter of advocating and working with people. We were just talking yesterday with one of my staffers about the importance for us to reach out to Republicans that already have seats and are staying in those seats. So we're sending a letter out to just say to them, hey, listen, we know that a lot of change is happening. We're looking forward to working with you. We want you to know that we are invested in working across the aisle. We want you to know that we see what Mike Johnson's been doing in terms of his work to try to get this spending bill passed and working with both sides. So there are ways for us to start communicating now that we are in that seat and want to start doing that work with them as soon as they're ready to work with us, right? Alexander Hamilton said that the key to a stable government was compromise. And that was a long time ago. And he's one of our forefathers and comes with the wisdom of the ages in terms of how we constructed our government here. And so we were established as a country that had the extremes. We have the extreme federalists who believe that the only role of the federal government was to defend the nation if we were under attack. And then we had the other extremes, which believed that there was a lot of things and responsibilities that the federal government had to be in charge of, that would be regulated for all states. Now, remember, at that time, the population was much smaller than it is today. The size of the country was much smaller than it is today. And the culture was very different than it is today on so many different levels. But we were a country of immigrants. We were settlers, actually. There were people that lived here before us. I sit now, as I'm speaking to you, on Cherokee land, and that is now Knoxville in the state of Tennessee. But this is originally Cherokee land. I think we have to remember that we were settlers. We were immigrants who came here, and from all over Europe, as well as, certainly specifically England, Ireland, that was a big part of our population was the UK. But as things have changed, and we do have to talk about those things, we have to talk about the value of immigration, what immigration looks like, how it supports and feeds our country, and then how we do it in a way that's not compromising our states that could end up being overloaded with actual human beings, right? So we have to find ways to manage all of those things. And I think there's a good conversation to be had about that as well. Obviously, if there was an easy solution to the immigration problem, it would have been solved decades ago. There is not an easy solution. And so this is going to take a lot of really good minds coming together with the purpose of a solution in mind, as opposed to continuing to perpetuate a problem that really has more of a political bend than a solution for those states, and also for those individuals, those human beings that are trying to come to the United States like our forefathers did for a better life, right? The majority of them. Yes, so we can talk about immigration issues as well a bit later. I also think that it's really imperative that we understand a fundamental part of my belief system is that a strong nation is one that is well fed, is well educated, is well housed and clothed, and has access to affordable medical care. It's one that feels where there's safety in our public spaces, and includes our schools and our concerts and our restaurants. It's really important to me that we are a country that supports the rights of individuals to determine who their family is, what that looks like, who they love, if and when they want to have a child. Those are all very personal decisions, and I do not believe the government has a role in any part of that process and decision making. It was Ulysses S. Grant who said back in I'm trying to remember, 85, was it?
1885.
1885 at the Iowan caucus. He said that there are three things that are imperative for a successful union. One was equal rights for all. One was access to equal education, which I think is interesting how high up in their priorities that was back then. And then third was the complete separation. He didn't just say separation. He said complete separation of church and state. So I believe that we all have a fundamental right in this country to practice our own spiritual truth. And I don't think that harm should be part of that. I do believe we draw our lines with harm there. But anything that we are practicing that is our spiritual belief, I'm an advocate of protecting that right. So I see that, in the moment we have, and I do believe there's a huge distinction between practicing Christians and Christian nationality. And it's one of the big fears that a lot of folks have about the takeover of our government. We're seeing it happen. Things are creeping in. We're seeing where that's coming from in some of the more radical, extreme right-wing organizations, where they are literally creating laws. They call them a black book. They literally are creating laws. They hand that black book to state legislators. There's some that is happening at the federal level too, but the most damaging places at the state levels right now. And they're handing these black books to these legislators that have literally legislation that these people have no connection to, have in no way written, and obviously they're getting the endorsement of it because they are taking it to the floor. But if you were to ask questions about it, many of these folks would not be able to answer questions about this legislation. This is happening all over the country and has been happening for a while. So that legislation is coming to defend the elite, to defend and corporations. And all of those things have grave consequences to our economy. So they might be amazing for that very few, but the reality is our middle class is imploding.
Right.
And as the middle class gets smaller and smaller, those tax revenues that support the less fortunate, or those that are going through a tough time, so for some of them, someone who's gotten very sick, a woman who's been diagnosed with breast cancer. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this story. A woman who's been diagnosed with breast cancer. Her kids are grown, because it happens most of the time to women, in their 40s and 50s, that their kids are grown and gone. They may have gone through a divorce or separation, through other reasons, and they may be on their own. When they're diagnosed with breast cancer and they're their only full sustainer, they lose everything. I myself went through that. I was, you can see if anyone's interested in watching my campaign launch video, I do tell a little bit about this story of having breast cancer and not having insurance, because I had just gone through a separation, and how he had canceled my health insurance as a tool to try to keep me in the relationship. And so I had to move forward with that, and it's very expensive to move. And so when I didn't have the money up front to get insurance immediately, and I was waiting for the Affordable Care Act to come through, and I had a lump in my breast, and I had to wait. And then when I found out, I was my sole provider. There was no one else providing for me. So I had to beg, I had to do go and do a fund me to try to get people to help and support me, because there was nothing under me. to help me through that process. And that was a huge challenge and terrifying. Some women, I ended up getting support. But I still, I had to move, and I lost my practice because I couldn't work. And so this happens to a lot of women. And so some are more fortunate than others, but many are not, and end up just trying to navigate a world they've never lived in. They've always worked, whether it was being a parent, which is a full-time job, another thing to be compensated, and we should talk about, is that parenting choice. But also, if they have been working, how those shifts happen, and it doesn't take long, a year, maybe two, that you can tank very quickly in your own financial world. So that's a problem. What are the solutions? We have to talk about those solutions. How do we sustain those people? They do have solutions in other countries. And we need to make sure that we have those here as well, and that they're easy to navigate, so that someone who's challenged with those things is not struggling. We also need to really be focused on our educational system. This is, again, going back to Grant. He's talking about education way back then. And we need to start re-looking at how we educate in this country. There is a movement to undermine our public systems. And it's happening through on a number of levels. The biggest one, of course, being finances, moving public funds into private schools, which the reality is the majority of the states where this has happened, the kids that really actually use those, let's call them coupons, because they're really like more of a coupon than a tuition payment, because they don't pay the whole year. Most of those parents who actually are in need of that are not necessarily going to be able to raise those other funds in their lives. And interestingly enough, they only have here in the state of Tennessee, now this voucher plan did just fail, thanks be to God, but the income qualification was only for the first year.
Right.
I mean, they were just blatant about the fact that this doesn't have anything to do with the fact that they're trying to, support kids that are in lower income brackets to get a private education. So most of the kids in the states where they did use this were actually already in private schools, and they were really literally using it like a coupon, pulling that money out of the school system.
Yeah, the same thing happened here in Oklahoma, with our voucher system that we put in place by our Republican Congress. And we've got a state superintendent of schools who's a complete disaster. But again, 95% of the people who received the voucher, their children were already in school. And the other thing that the private schools did, you've seen it across the board throughout Oklahoma, is they raised the price of tuition equally, that same amount, whatever that tuition was. So there was really no benefit to anybody, not even the rich, whenever they did that. So
Wow.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry. You were on such
no,
a
I'm glad
roll.
you did. I love having a conversation. No.
Yeah.
I'm open to any, certainly engage. I feel like that's really important. It's one of the big, I believe, important roles for us is to be good listeners and to have open ears and eyes to find out what's going on, how people feel, what's important to them, what they value. So, and I can tell you, it's very easy for me to keep talking. So.
Well, let me tell you this right now. I am so impressed, Scott. I'm stealing your thunder, because I'm going to tell you right now, we are just thoroughly impressed with everything that you've got to say. You are absolutely the 100% professional, and we can't wait to support you for House District 2 there in Tennessee, because it is obvious to us, that you are beyond qualified and beyond capable of being that citizen representative for the people of Tennessee. And we're just ecstatic to have this conversation with you. And we were going to ask you to give us your opening remarks, and my goodness, you talk about blowing us away. So,
Kevin, if I may, I just want to make a point, Jane. You're running to obviously represent the people of Tennessee, but the issues that you're talking about affect Americans all over the country. And I was particularly struck by, early on as you were speaking, you talked about the necessity of working across the aisle. And we have become so polarized particularly in politics in our nation right now. I'd like for you to dig in a little deeper on what that looks like for you in terms of really being able to have a conversation, build working relationships, and pass legislation with Republicans that benefits everyone.
Okay, I'm going to start by saying, first of all, I think we've got to get back to we're all Americans first. That we might did have different ideologies, and we're supposed to, right? Let's just accept that everybody's supposed to, so that there's not a judgment on that. It's the way it's supposed to be, right? We're not supposed to be monotheistic. We're not supposed to be a single party system, right? None of that stuff is supposed to be part of being America. So let's talk about first that we are Americans first. When people ask me, when I talk in communities, I'm involved in organizations where there are a lot of Republican women. When I go into last night, I went to a rural community, and they start lambasting me with, what about China? And what, I don't even think they know what they're asking really, because when you start answering their questions, they're kind of like, oh, well, okay, but so we have to find ways to not polarize. And the example I like to use, and I created this actually when I went into a high school, local high school asked me to come in and speak to their seniors. And I said, listen, I walked in the room and I said, hey, everybody, I'm a Dodger fan. And the kids, I go, who here's the Dodger fan? And they all kind of looked at me like, and some of the boys started going, oh, no, I'm the Yankees or I'm the Cubs. Or, they start telling me, Braves was a big one, of course, here. So they start telling me what their favorite baseball teams are. So I go, okay, give it to me. What are the rules of baseball? Like, what do these teams have in common? So they start shouting things out, all the obvious, but there are a lot of things that baseball teams have in common. Then I said, okay, now talk to us about what's different. And the things that they talked about that were different were, and I thought this was brilliant. One kid said, our coaches have different strategies. Yes, they do. That doesn't make them a good or bad coach. It doesn't mean that they're not still in the game. It doesn't mean that their players don't listen to them. It doesn't mean that they still don't get their playbook studied, right? Even if they're so yes, they're coaches. They have different colored uniforms. So as they go through the stuff, we were like, okay, so do you think we have more in common as baseball teams or a difference? And the kids all said, oh, in common, right? They just got it, right? So I said, I think what's happening in politics right now is that there are some politicians who are taking issues that really matter to Americans and they're using them like baseball bats to bludgeon each other,
Right.
as opposed to playing the game of baseball. Now, of course, government is much more important in the big scheme of things than baseball games. But I wanted to give the kids an accessible way to really think about what's happening with these two parties and to see what's happening in a way that was relatable. And I do think that this is what's happening. We have to get back to playing the game. And so I don't know that game is the right word when we talk about politics, but we need to get back to really dealing with the issues that Americans are concerned with. People are very afraid. I'm just going to say it. I hate to talk about fear because I think that we do have hope and I want to stay in that space, but people are afraid that we're losing our democracy. And that's on both sides, mind you, right? So that is not necessarily a D or an R mind think. It's happening on both sides. So how do we heal that? Well, first of all, we have to go into the chambers and we have to be able to talk to each other and we have to say, listen, this is really important, right? Like passing a spending bill is really important. If we're going to fund the government is really important. So when we have issues with politicians who say things like, well, there's too much pork in that. Everything that comes out, they say no to. That's my particular, the person I'm running against. There's pork in everything. He's absolutely no. He's a deconstructionist. I mean, well, let's just face it. But so here's the thing. If you are constantly saying no to everything, and you want to use the excuse that it's about the pork that's in there, then you have to always, how do you then confess when you're trying to pass something that there's no pork in it? Because there is. So it's a device that is used to prevent legislation from moving forward for political gain in order to win an election, right? So the paycheck keeps coming so we can pay for the boat.
Right.
right? It has nothing to do with actually saying we need to pass this legislation. Yes, that's how it works in America. Stuff gets dumped in there. We're not going to like all of it. I mean, I just want to say to people when they start talking about this, listen, do you and your partner get along all the time? Do you believe all the same things?
No,
You know,
absolutely not. No.
no, of course not. Of course you don't. Nobody lives in that world. So if you can imagine that you can live with and do live with a partner in the same household, you guys work your budget out, you have kids together, you don't always agree on even how to raise your kids, right? You're going to have different ideas, but you still have something that's bigger and larger than you. Not that you as individuals aren't big and large, you are as human beings, as Americans. But when you come together, there's that third entity, which is, you know, us together working through life. And so we have to get back to that family principle, I believe, in politics. So that's where I am. I can talk to my family. I have members of my family, I won't call them out, but I still have members of my family that are still alive today that I'm very close to, that I love very, very much, who absolutely blast me for being a Democrat. They use it like it's a dirty word. And I say to them, hey, I don't feel that way about it with the word Republican. I don't feel like it's a dirty word. I feel like there's extreme policy issues going on that are being carried by a party that's even now calling them the extreme right.
Right.
So the Republican Party is even calling them the extreme right, right? I don't know if you are aware, but just this week in our legislation to start to, you know, to get government back to work and fund things like taking care of our veterans and our government institutions, making sure people get their paychecks so they can buy their groceries, you know, people that work for the government. So my opponent said that he did not believe that it should be funded. And he went so far as to say that anyone who voted for it should vote to get their A kicked,
Right.
voted out. So, and what was amazing about that is that the Speaker of the House, who I'm not a huge fan of, let me just say that out front, I'm not his advocate. I certainly work with him. You know, if he was put there, people put him there, right? I mean, votes got these people in seats, and you know, we got to go back to that. You can blame gerrymandering, you can blame anything, money, you can blame all those things, but the bottom line is the thing that got those people that are making those decisions in the Tennessee legislature and our city councils and in our federal government are votes, right? And everybody that's an American citizen and that has cleared their way, if they have paid their debt in some other way, and then have gained their voting rights back, has a vote.
Absolutely.
Doesn't cost anything. I mean, now it can be made hard, right? Let's make it hard. Here in Tennessee, I ran a couple cycles ago for state senate. And just before the mail-in voting was about to start, they took the blue postal boxes that were distributed across the city. They took those postal boxes out of certain areas. And when they pulled them up, they just cut the whole sidewalk with them.
Oh my gosh.
And they relocated them. There's still one in front of my office on the west side, right? It's sitting out there sunk in its concrete, you know, like some kind of mafia gangster put it there so it could be thrown into the river, right? It's crazy. And there's one in front of the courthouse that sits next to the door at the courthouse. They sold the machine that counts. They have counting machines that count. They got rid of those at one of our main post offices. I mean, those things can happen, right? We are aware that there is a movement to try to stop people on our side of the fence from voting. But it means we have to work a little harder, maybe, you know, than others might. And there is work to obviously to stop voting rights. But my point is just saying that that's how they get there, is by votes. And so we have to do everything we can to protect voters' rights, and then also to make sure that people are voting. Yeah.
And
so I think I strayed entirely from your question, but getting back to making things work, you know, we have to all find a way that we can use that family structure in our government. And I think that one of the things that has happened over time is that the Republican Party has taken the words family, faith, and freedom, and then taken our flag,
right,
and said, these are ours. And they are wrong about that.
Absolutely.
So one of the tenets of our campaign is your family, your faith, your freedom. And then we've added to that your future. because those are things that we also as Democrats support and sustain in our party. So we can find resonance there, I think. And I don't know that it's going to be easy, but it's going to be harder to say, to obstruct legislation that serves people when you have voted to get people in those positions so that our voice amplifies because there's more of us than there is of those naysayers.
Right, exactly. You know, one of the wonderful things about where we're at in politics today is, I think, you know, I relate it to a pendulum, where the pendulum swings from side to side, and we've seen it go to that extreme right, and now we're seeing that pendulum has reached as far as it's going to go, and it's starting to come back, and we want it to come back rapidly. It's going to come back at its own pace, but we want it to come back rapidly. And the way we do that is by supporting people like yourself and voting people like yourself to go to Washington, D.C. and be those citizen representatives that can actually facilitate change and hope and bring that kind of faith back to our democracy. And the foundation of our democracy is so important that we can't just kick it to the curb and just say, all right, we're going to dismantle it. We're going to, what do they say? We're going to drain the swamp, which means we want to dismantle everything there is about government. If that's not a possibility, that's not where we want to go. That's the most detrimental and negative thing you can ever do to your country, is just take the foundation of your house away from you. So I'm so excited. I mean, literally, I keep hearing you talk, and I just want to get up and I want to just charge forward and just do everything I can to help you, because you just are so passionate, and you have such great knowledge about what you're talking about too. I'm just, everything you talk about, I'm just so supportive. And we do need to break down and get down to some of those specifics that you did talk about earlier, and we need to kind of talk a little bit more specific about them. And let's start first and foremost, education. We've had one of the most tragic things happen this year, in the last year, I should say, school year, that we had an incident. I guess it was actually last year, but we had an incident that happened in a school in Nashville, and it was a gun violence issue, and it resulted in 3 of the state legislators getting pulled up on charges that were trumped up charges by the House. And then 2 of them were kicked out. We know exactly why they were kicked out, because they were Black. Miss Johnson, she was able to stay in. Gloria was able to stay in only because of the color of her skin. We all know that. I mean, it's so blatant. And then yesterday, through the education system and the process, and it's going to go before I guess the governor today in the state of Tennessee is going to sign into law and actually put guns into schoolrooms. The most disgusting thing that you could ever ask for with anybody anywhere. And we're seeing that acceleration of just really tragic things. And it's going to lead to more tragedy. But talk to us a little bit about your belief in the education system and your belief in how to solve the education or the current public teachers crisis that we have throughout our nation right now.
So first of all, let me just start and say, I'm not a public education expert. I can tell you my opinion and how I feel about it, what my experience has been. But the number one issue here is that we have to put competent people in charge of agencies.
Thank you.
That are in charge of these things, correct?
Absolutely.
So we need to have powerful people who have that background, who are invested in seeing it work in America, right? I, as a legislator, feel that the most important thing I can do is make way for those people to be there to participate and make sure that laws are not passed that are going to in any way obstruct that, right? That goes back to voting too, because if you've got, when our former president came in and, just took down the website. So the EPA and, education hired somebody specifically to dismantle the educational system. So these are things that as a legislator, I have no control over, right? So this goes back to the voter. You have to make good decisions. These things have to matter to you. Now, I will say that I'm public educated. So I did start in private school as a kid. I was in a little boutique private school until 5th grade. And then I wanted to go public, and I'm glad that I did. I had an amazing education. The high school that I went to is still a really great school here in Knoxville. And I was able to launch myself into the world with a really sound, I believe, foundation. And then went to UCLA, which is a public school. It's one of the top 25 science schools in the world. I was one of 19 people that got into their PhD program. You know, I was able to teach, to pay for my education. So public education has been incredibly generous to me and to my children as well. So, my children were in the public system. So I'm a huge advocate of the public system. I also believe that if you want to have a more parochial education for your kids, that you have a right to that. But that's
Sure.
between you and the school and the church
Absolutely.
that funds that school. And you have to work that out with them. That doesn't have anything to do with government. We're not preventing you from doing that. That school might be.
Right.
That's not the government's problem or responsibility. That's between you and the school and their profit making and all of that. So for there to even be the hint of a suggestion, in my opinion, that the public dollars should be used to fund church-based or religious-based schools is just unbelievable to me. I do believe that's a family choice. I do believe that's between that family and that institution. It doesn't have anything to do with government. You know, it's when people want to argue about the government, our initial government being a Christian government, and that we should have rights to, well, the bottom line is there's just nothing in the documents to say that that's the case. And in fact, just the opposite. So this analogy that somehow our original government would have supported this and that's how we should be using our dollars is absurd. It's not real. I mean, we didn't even say in the Pledge of Allegiance under God until 1954.
Right.
You know,
under
that was
Eisenhower.
added during during the McCarthy scare. So, you know, these are things that are just used to manipulate people into believing that this is what this country is about and how it should look, and therefore our schools should mirror that, right? And that's just inaccurate at best. But at worst, it's literally a deconstruction of what we were created to be as a government through government support and rules and regulations. So I would advocately defend any law or legislation that prevents that overlap from happening in any way that I could. I think that, you know, schools beyond that, they're dealing with a lot of other issues, especially here in the South, you know, with what's happening now with arming teachers, having more guns in schools. The right is dependent upon one guy who's just proclaimed to be, and he's a smart economist. I mean, you know, there's no doubt about it. Good schools, good education has done well. But, you know, you've got this one guy out there that's claiming that there's actual research that's been done that shows that this doesn't endanger children. And it's so flawed. And anyone, you know, if you're going to say it's research, it has to be peer reviewed, and you have to have other academics, other research scientists look at it to say, yeah, this is valid. That's just the way science works, right? And this guy doesn't.
You got to build a hypothesis. You got to do a null hypothesis. You got to do the research. You've got to, you know, the research science is not something off the cuff. You just can't go out into the street and have a discussion with your neighbor about this and say, all right, this is science. We've discovered everything. No, this is actually peer reviewed, just like you said. I have to agree with you on that so much, because so much of what we see out of Fox News that's being pushed onto so many people, this ignorant ideology that guns are the solution, will solve everything. If you just, you know, if we would arm our kindergartners, that the gun violence would go down. And I can't even imagine that. As somebody who grew up in the country and understood how to handle a weapon from a very young age, and by the way, I learned very, very fast, you know, with a father who would not tolerate any unsafe gun activity, that, you know, how to be safe and not tolerate being around people who were unsafe with their weapons. By that being said, I have grown to appreciate the fact that we've got so many Democrats right now who say we've got to curb gun violence, maybe not by not taking every gun away from people, but by making people smarter with what they're doing and not allowing guns to be in the hands of people who should have never had guns to begin with, have red flag laws in order to actually remove the guns from unsafe situations so that people will not harm themselves or harm others, and also have mechanisms in place to prevent people from getting guns that are guns of war, that are weapons of war, that should never be in the hands of a civilian state. So I totally am 100% on that, on board with that. And I so much appreciate what you're saying. I mean, literally, again, I'm going to say it again. I'm going to sound like a broken record. I'm ready to grab your banner and charge on. I'm ready to go.
Thank
Well,
you.
but before we charge on, I want to take a step in a bit of a different direction,
Okay,
because
so.
I want to take advantage of what little time we have left today.
Mhm.
And this is related to economic opportunity, jobs, because we all know situations in our communities and in our own families where someone has to work 2 or 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads.
Mhm.
I'm very concerned that Republicans are really pushing the idea of delayed retirement for Social Security purposes, because the older one gets, the more difficult it is to find gainful employment. I think young people have a pretty wide open range of opportunities right now, perhaps better than they've had in a long time. But for mid-career folks, and particularly later career individuals, how how do you see addressing this on a national level where economic opportunity is something that is not just a dream, but it actually could become a reality for many more Americans?
So I wish I could just answer that in 3 sentences. We didn't get here overnight. There's been a lot that's been done to prop up our current circumstances. Dismantling that is going to take a lot of work, and power begets power, so it won't be easy. But what I can say is that we have to start. I believe fundamentally we have to make sure that people are getting paid a living wage. There are so many things that work against our poor people, and by poor I mean economically poor, because many people who are economically poor have lots of wealth in their lives. It's just not in dollars. But for those people who are struggling economically and are working here in Tennessee for $7.25 an hour, in addition to that $7.25 an hour, you still have your unemployment taken out. You still have your Social Security taken out. So, you're not even living on $7.25 an hour, right? That money's taken out of your paychecks. And there are lots of companies out there who've decided we're not going to put you to work over 30 hours. So, because we don't want to pay the benefits that are required if you're a full-time worker. And that's how people end up with a couple of different jobs, sometimes 3. And because they have to do that in order to be able to pay for those things that would normally be benefits at a full-time job. So, we're already started at a real disadvantage just in terms of the income that people are making. We need a higher minimum wage. That is just the way it is. Even here in Tennessee, when we talk about, in order to live in Knoxville, for example, there numbers that are going around is that you need to be able to make at least $65,000 a year in order to be able to live in East Tennessee. And some of the Republicans have gotten up and said, well, we have this thousands of jobs coming in to East Tennessee. Isn't it great? But these jobs are so low paying. The state is sold out over and over again as the state with the least amount of regulation and the most amount of cheap labor. So we're actually marketed that way, right? So there are consequences to that for those individuals. We have to change the way that we think about our citizens. We can't think of them as a cheap labor force to facilitate our donors' profits. And that's pretty much how it's working at this point, right?
Thank you.
So it's not even our profits, it's our donors' profits who keep us in our jobs so we get our paychecks, so we can make our payment on our boat, right? So that is one issue that's in the mix that has to be managed. Another is How do we have to have affordable housing. Affordable housing is tricky. You know, it's not something that the federal government has a big role to play. We cannot go in and legislate that you can't charge more than da-da-da a square foot, right? Because boy, the people, example, one of the kids in the school, he goes, well, how do you feel about the fact that the cost of groceries are up and why hasn't Biden done something about it? I said, do you really think that the president of the United States sets the price of an apple? Because he doesn't. And neither does Congress. This is a free market. You live in a capitalistic culture that's based on supply and demand. And since COVID, we have seen an increase in the benefits that are being paid to executives, an increase in profits for a lot of people in the service industry specifically, but also in the grocery stores. Well, we don't regulate that. If you want us to start regulating that, you're going to have to get some socialists in seats because that's socialism.
Right.
So, you know, that's not even Democrat anymore. That's socialism. So you can't have it both ways. Stay out of my life, but regulate the price of the apple. You can't have stay out of my life, but make sure I can afford housing. You can't say, don't take money from China and shop at the Dollar Tree every day.
Right.
You know, you've got to look at your labels and see, are these things made in China? The very people that advocate completely abolishing a relationship with China don't understand that most everything they have in their homes was made in China, right? You're going to have to pay more and support American workers if you want to sever that relationship. That's personal decisions again and again.
So let's build on what you just said. Let's invest in our American workers. What just happened this week that we can all, you know, raise our hands about, and that is that Volkswagen went union. And again, that goes back to the strategy that, you know, you were talking earlier about President Biden, of his strategy of building the economy from the bottom up and the middle out. And we just supported union labor in Tennessee, and we're going to bring Tennessee Volkswagen up to standard with the rest of the automobile industry. And who's leading that charge? The citizens of Tennessee.
That's
I'm
right.
just excited about that.
Yeah, it's thrilling. And, you know, here's the other interesting thing is that whenever there are union workers in a community, it raises the standard for everyone else.
Absolutely.
So we know that even the non-union workers, so people that may be going to work in an industry where they can't unionize, they're going to benefit from this. So it is an amazing change for Tennessee. And like you said, it came way from the inside out. Right, because there was nobody who could step on them and say these were these people's jobs. And when you see the interviews with them and how thrilled they are and how much hope they have to be able to just live a life, you know, that's not every day full of struggle. Yeah, it's very exciting. And I'm a union member and have been since I was 19 years old.
Yes, me as well.
Yeah, cool. So I just out of curiosity, I know we are limited on time, and it's really important to me that we get to women's healthcare in this conversation.
Let's do that right now, because
Yes.
that's our next topic.
Okay, awesome. So we're really going backwards here, and these impacts are, you know, obviously have a direct impact on the individual. I want to start by saying that I do not perceive a female as a vessel. Therefore, I do not believe that an exception should be at the risk of her physical health. I believe she has a right to financial health. I believe that she has a right to spiritual health. I believe she has a right to emotional health. So I think that there's a lot more than her. So I'm not going to talk about just our bodies.
Right.
Right. Yes, you keep your hand off my body. You don't get to make decisions about my body, but those decisions are made in light of a whole other context, which includes those other parts of my life. So I'll tell my story in brevity. I got pregnant when I was 20 and I was not married. I was in love, but I wasn't married. And I decided to carry that pregnancy.
Sure.
And that was the right choice for me. And I had that choice. And even though everyone around me was saying, oh my God, don't do this, you're going to tank your whole life. And that to me was very important. And so I chose to carry the pregnancy. He's still on the planet. He's an amazing human being. Then 3 years later, I got pregnant again. I was thrilled and excited, but it was what they call a blighted ovum. So it was a non-viable pregnancy.
Oh, sure.
And so, but my body didn't know that. So when I went in my 8th week and then my 10th week and then my 12th week, my doctor said, you know, at some point your body will recognize that this is not a viable pregnancy. But the longer that you wait for this to happen, the more you're going to have issues with probability of hemorrhaging, sepsis, creating an infection, but also your ability to become pregnant again in the future. So that day, my physician said, we need to do a D&C, and that's the procedure that's used for an abortion. So I had that day, and of course it was devastating, and
Sure.
we mourned and all of those things, but nonetheless, it was the right thing to do, and it was the right thing for my health, and in that case, a physical health, because the rest of me was really excited. All the other parts of me was really excited about that pregnancy. Then the next pregnancy was great, went to term. He's an amazing human being, love him so much. He's married to a beautiful woman. They have a great life. And then I got pregnant again, and the fourth time I was in graduate school, and I had been working. I was at home with my kids, going to school, trying to make a better life, to be able to contribute to my family financially, to be a good role model for my kids, and to be a participant in a community which was academia for me at that time, that was really important and thriving for me as a person and a human being. And so I had to make a decision at that point about, do I stay being a full-time mom, not advance my career, not do the things that I need to do to bring financial stability into my family, all of those issues, in order to carry this pregnancy to term. Well, kids are pregnant. I mean, kids are expensive. And we already had our family. The age was, my youngest was 10.
Right.
So we decided to terminate that pregnancy. So I have had 3 different experiences in terms of where I was protected by the laws to make those choices.
Sure.
And so and I will say that, there were difficulties with the losing and the miscarriage, which was, a medically, it was a D&C. They call it a miscarriage, but it was, and then the last one, which was a decision that needed to be made with myself. And my husband at the time said, this is your decision. Whatever you do, I will support you. This is your decision. So it really was up to me to navigate how I was going to plan the rest of my future in terms of, and I, and it was the right decision still to this day. Of course, I'm much older now, but it was the right decision to this day. I feel like that was the appropriate thing for me to decide. So that's my side of the story. I know what this is like. I know what it feels like. And I cannot imagine not having those options in my own life, and how devastating those things could have turned out for me had I had made other decisions. I see now what's happening in the state of Tennessee specifically is we have physicians that are leaving. And when an obstetrician leaves the state, they take their gynecological practice with them. And where that is an issue right now in a major way is in rural Tennessee.
Absolutely.
Where there may not be a lot of OBGYNs. So we have now in Tennessee something called maternal deserts, where a woman is 90 minutes away from healthcare if she needs it. If you are in a woman of non-reproductive health and your gynecologist was also an obstetrician and they've left, as these physicians are leaving, those women do not have access to their cancer screenings. They don't have
Right.
access to their hormone replacement therapy. They don't have access to care to keep their bones healthy and strong. They don't have their breast exams. They're not getting their pap smears. They're not able to get their care. So now it's all women who are affected by access, virtually just through access to care. The women where they're trying to make it illegal for us to even leave the state, for young women to be able to leave the state to get the care they need. It's just, that's about control. That has nothing to do with being pro-life. These are control measures.
Thank you. Thank you. And I appreciate everything that you said on that. And I hate to interrupt, but we are getting close to the end, and we do need to do one. And again, your messages are so important, so critical, Jane. And I hate to end it at this point, but we've got to support you. And I've got to try to do something here real quick. I want to come over here, and I want for people to see this. We've got to be able to support Jane, and we've got to do it in the most fundamental way that we can. And that is, number one, we've got to support you financially. We've got to have people support your campaign and go to your ActBlue account and invest, just like you said, $5, $10, $25, whatever you can to reclaim our own government. We've got to do that. And we support 100%. What you're doing, but we also need to support you as volunteers. We need to support you by trying to promote volunteers to go knock door to door, to text people, to call people on the telephone, get people excited about joining Jane and supporting her campaign and getting Jane elected. It's one thing to support Jane, but we've got to have a plan to GOTV and get people into the polls and into the voting booth and actually voting for Jane in Tennessee in House District 2. It's critically important. And we do that also by volunteering our time, having people out there to take Jane from door to door. I mean, it's so important to just drop Jane off in the middle of the summer on one end of the block, let her do her job and go out there door to door knocking with the people, and then pick her up at the other end or at the and have a air conditioned car for her to get into with a cold drink. It's so important to support Jane all the way around. And whenever she's having her campaign speeches, have a cold drink ready for her and support her, get her to that campaign speech and take her home when it's done. So we've got to do everything we can to support Jane. Jane, thanks so much for being on Coffee with Democrats. I mean, at this point, we've got to get you back on again because we're not done with this conversation.
That sounds great.
I agree.
Thank you both so much. I do want to say one quick thing about fundraising because I know that our audience is wide, right? And not all in Tennessee. So I just want to say that one of the things that we're asking people to do, you may not be able to do a house party and raise money for me here in Tennessee, and that's fair. But what you can do is you can decide that you are going to support this campaign. And let's say that you thought, okay, it's worth $50. I'm going to give Jane $50 after seeing where she stands today. But not only am I going to do that, I'm going to also call 9 other people, get 9 people to commit to giving $50. So then my 50 just became 500. So it's
Absolutely.
a form of house partying, and you do it until you reach your number, right? So if you do 50, you do it, you make those calls until you reach 500, and you have people call you and say, you know, check off the list. We've done it. We've contributed, so that you know that you've done that. If we get people doing that all over the country, realizing that what we're doing is putting me, but this is the case for all legislators, we're legislating for the country. I'm legislating for little girls in Oklahoma right now.
Absolutely.
That my job is not just for Tennessee when it comes to legislation. Decisions that are made about international affairs, decisions that are made about the debt. You know, we didn't get to talk about the debt, which I really want to talk about, but we can do that another time. So just keep that in mind. We're encouraging people to reach out to family and friends across state lines, because across state lines, women do not have equal access to medical care, and that's not a democracy.
Right,
Women should
right.
have access to the same medical care across state lines, and that is just unbelievable. And who owns our bodies? That's a slippery slope.
Right.
So we need to start realizing that whomever we choose to send to Washington, we need to make sure that we're sending advocates for our women.
Yeah, and you are a step in the right direction to codify Roe and get
That's right.
Roe as the law of the land, and not having small pockets subjugated to the will of extremists. So
That's right.
thank you, Jane, for being on Coffee with Democrats. You are so awesome. We are just so thankful for you being able to take the time out of your day to spend just a few moments with us. And your message is so important, and you are so on topic. I mean, you are just precise and so good. I just cannot. I mean, I've got to support you more than what I'm doing right now. There's not enough we can do to help you. So thank you so much for being on Coffee with Democrats. We're going to be back on here tomorrow. Scott and I have our show weekly update tomorrow. And then we've got a whole host of people that are going to be coming on next week. We've also got a LGBTQ activity that we're planning for Friday that we're helping Melissa McCain with her campaign up in Tulsa. And we want to really help out those people that are in the LGBTQ community. I can't even say it because I'm so excited about what we're doing and helping more people. Jane, good Lord, I hope you don't mind me saying, I love you. I want to support you. I want to do everything I can. I'm ready to pick up the banner and run in front of you and part the seas for you. Thank you so much for coming on Coffee with Democrats.
Thank you so much. It's been fun to be here. We'll do it again.
All right. Thanks again.
Absolutely.
All right. Goodbye, Scott, and thank you.
Bye-bye.
This segment of Coffee with Democrats is brought to you by Steve Holcomb, Attorney at Law. With family ties to Oklahoma in the legal field that goes back as far as the early 1900s, Steve Holcomb is a well-known and respected attorney at law in Pawhuska, Oklahoma. You can trust Steve Holcomb, Attorney at Law, with your legal needs. For generations encompassing over 100 years, the Holcomb family name has practiced law and served the cattlemen of Oklahoma. From Marion Holcomb, Steve's great-grandfather, who became a judge among the lands of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes in southwest Oklahoma in the early 1900s, who then moved to Pawhuska to practice law, to his grandfather, Thad Holcomb Sr., and his father, Lee Holcomb, who both served as presidents of the Osage County Cattlemen's Association. The Holcomb name has been and still is the trusted name for Oklahomans. As an enthusiastic supporter of Coffee with Democrats, who promotes the Oklahoma standard of service, honor, and kindness, Steve Holcomb is the attorney we recommend going to when you have general practice legal needs. Call 918-287-8762. That's 918-287-8762 to schedule a consultation. Initial consultations may be provided free of charge, or go to holcomb.legal for more information.